I never thought a simple text message could make my hands tremble like that. You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just family. Those cold words came from my son, the same son I'd given a house to just months ago. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the disregard, the callousness with which he dismissed me, the very woman who raised him, fed him, loved him unconditionally. And there I was, alone on my anniversary, while my son moved further away from me every day. I had given them everything. But now I was nothing more than an afterthought. My name is Margaret Anderson, but my friends used to call me Maggie. And for the longest time, I thought that my life was a reflection of all the love and sacrifices I had poured into my family. I thought my children would always be there for me. I thought I had done everything right, raised them to be good people with hearts full of gratitude. But life has a way of testing our beliefs. I remember the days when my hands weren't so shaky, when I could lift heavy boxes without straining my back or wrinkling my face. In those days, I worked long hours, raising my children, giving them everything I had. I thought that was the price of love. To give it all, and to watch them grow with gratitude, loyalty, and respect. But as the years passed, I started to notice the shift, even if I didn't want to admit it. It began with the small things. The subtle exclusion at family gatherings, the whispered conversations that stopped as soon as I walked into the room. The way my daughter-in-law, Lily, would avoid my eyes whenever I tried to offer help with the grandkids. At first, I brushed it off. After all, life gets busy, doesn't it? But then there were the lies. The little white lies that I started to hear from my son, Michael. "You're too old to understand these things," he told me one afternoon. His voice steady but edged with something I couldn't quite place. "Lily and I have things figured out. You don't need to worry." I was taken aback. I knew I wasn't the youngest woman around, but I never thought my age would be held against me. There was always something in me that believed age was a badge of honor, something that came with wisdom and experience. I had lived through hard times, raised children on my own when their father passed away young, and yet, Michael saw me as outdated. The next time I noticed the distance was when Lily called me, asking me to watch the children while they went out for a weekend. It sounded harmless enough, but when I arrived at their house, I noticed something odd. My favorite chair, the one by the window where I used to sit and watch the birds, was no longer there. In its place, a new, sleek armchair I didn't recognize. The family photos I had given them over the years, the ones I had lovingly framed and hung up, were gone. Replaced with generic pictures of their families smiling on vacations I had never been invited to. It stung, more than I care to admit. But at the time, I couldn't put my finger on what was happening. I told myself, maybe it's just a phase. Maybe they're too busy with their own lives to notice how it's hurting me. But that was before the text. That was the moment everything changed. It's strange how life can change in an instant, isn't it? One moment, you're holding on to something familiar, something that feels like home. The next, it's slipping through your fingers like sand. That text from Michael, the one that shattered everything, didn't just sting. It sent a deep, cold wave through my chest. I hadn't been invited to their family dinner, to be part of the things I had always been a part of. And there was no apology, no explanation. Just that chilling message. I didn't respond at first. I sat in silence, my phone still clutched tightly in my hands, like if I didn't let go of it, I could somehow control the hurt. My living room, the one filled with my late husband's books, his favorite chair by the fireplace, felt emptier than it ever had before. I thought about all the times I had dropped everything to help Michael and Lily when they needed me. Watching the children when they couldn't manage their schedules, lending them money when things got tight. But that was before I realized how much they'd taken from me. I had always been the strong one in the family. I had to be. There was no one else to lean on when their father died. But as the years went by, I found myself more and more alone. The house I had built with my own two hands, the one I had shared with them for so many years, seemed like a distant memory. Now, it felt like I was nothing more than an outsider in my own home. I decided to call my best friend, Doris. She was the only person who truly understood. Doris had known me since we were in our 20s, and although she was 10 years older than me, she had always been sharp as a tack. Over the years, Doris and I had shared many cups of coffee, many tears, and many hours talking about our families. She was the kind of friend who would tell you the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "Margaret," she said when I explained what had happened, "you need to stop letting them walk all over you. You've done enough for them. It's time to start thinking about yourself." Her words, simple as they were, hit me like a thunderbolt. I had always been the one who gave, the one who cared, the one who sacrificed. I never once thought about what it would cost me. But now, as I sat in my quiet home, those words lingered. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice breaking. "They don't need me anymore. Margaret, don't you dare believe that. You've raised them, you've worked for them, and you've built a life for them. But that doesn't mean you owe them anything else. It's your turn to live too. You're not their servant, you're their mother. And you deserve respect, not neglect." Doris's words made something inside me stir. I couldn't keep letting them push me aside, let them take and take without ever giving anything back. It was time to protect myself. The next day, I made a decision. I was going to take control of my life, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. The first step, I started small, reaching out to a lawyer. I knew it wouldn't be easy to get the respect I deserved, but I needed to know my options. The lawyer's office was in a sleek building downtown, and when I walked through the doors, I felt out of place. The walls were filled with framed diplomas, the floors were polished to a shine. But as I sat down in the cold modern chair, I realized I was finally doing something for myself. "Mrs. Anderson," the lawyer said when he came in, "I'm glad you reached out. Let's talk about what you want to protect." I wasn't sure what to say at first. I had spent so many years protecting everyone else, I didn't know how to speak up for myself. But the more he talked about my rights, about the ways I could protect my assets, my property, my legacy, the more I began to feel something stir in me. It was the old Margaret, the one who didn't back down, the one who stood firm when the world tried to break her. "I want to protect my home," I said slowly. "And I want to make sure they can't take anything from me again." The lawyer nodded, already jotting down notes. "We'll start there. You've earned that right." And just like that, I felt a little less like a victim and a little more like someone who could still fight back. As the weeks passed, I took steps to secure my future. I hired an investigator to look into some of the things that had been happening behind my back. Money missing, accounts manipulated, all the things I had turned a blind eye to. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep the betrayal ran. But I also understood something else. It was never too late to take back what was mine. The day came when I stood in front of Michael and Lily with evidence in hand. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day where you can almost hear the weight of a conversation hanging in the air. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the kitchen, and the sun was setting outside. But inside, the tension was unbearable. Michael didn't see it coming. Neither did Lily. "You're upset with me, I can see that," Michael said, avoiding my gaze. "But we didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice steady but firm. "Michael, you've been taking from me for years. Financially, emotionally. You've pushed me aside, left me out, and made me feel worthless. I gave everything for you, for this family. And this is how I'm treated?" Lily shifted uncomfortably, but it was Michael who responded. "Mom, please, you don't understand. Things have changed. We're trying to move forward." "Forward?" I shook my head. "You think that means abandoning me, forgetting everything I did for you? That's not moving forward, Michael. That's manipulation." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael and Lily didn't know what to say. They couldn't look me in the eye. And that's when I knew. I had regained control. The days following that confrontation were difficult, to say the least. I had never expected it to be easy, but I had imagined that after speaking my truth, there would be some sense of relief. Instead, there was a heavy weight on my heart, a silence I couldn't shake off. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt peaceful. It was suffocating, like the air had thickened with unresolved tension. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. Michael's expression had been unreadable, his eyes avoiding mine as if he couldn't bear the truth of what I was saying. Lily, always the one to keep up appearances, had stared at me with an awkward smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was as though they both hoped if they stayed quiet long enough, it would all go away. But I knew that wasn't how it worked anymore. I spent the next few days trying to keep my mind busy, but every little thing in my house reminded me of the past. The family photos that lined my hallway, the ones I had carefully arranged and placed, now felt like reminders of a life I no longer recognized. I had poured so much into this family, so many years of sacrifice, and now, it felt like I had been cast aside. My own flesh and blood. But I refused to let myself fall into the pit of self-pity. If I had learned anything in my life, it was that no one would fight for me the way I would fight for myself. Doris called me the next day. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I could sense the concern in her voice as soon as I answered the phone. "Margaret, how are you holding up?" she asked, her tone warm but laced with worry. "I'm managing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's been tough, Doris, but I'm not backing down." "I'm proud of you, you know that?" she said, a little softer now. "You've always been the one to give, to take care of others. Now, it's your turn to take care of yourself. Don't let them rob you of your peace." Her words felt like a balm to my soul. Doris had always been the one person who truly understood me, and even though she was older than me by a good decade, she had a clarity I hadn't had for a long time. She was right, of course. It was my turn. My turn to put my own needs first, my turn to demand the respect I deserved. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I got up early. The house was still quiet, just the way I liked it. I hadn't been sleeping well, my mind racing with all the things I had to do, but today was different. Today I was going to take control. I started by going over my finances, something I had been avoiding for too long. I had handed over my trust so easily to Michael, assuming he'd take care of everything, but I realized now that I had been blind. I had been too passive, too eager to please, and now it was time to correct that. I called the bank and made an appointment to go over my accounts. Then, I reached out to a lawyer. I wasn't sure where this path would lead me, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my family's expectations. It was time to take ownership of my future, and that meant protecting what was mine. Later that afternoon, I met with the lawyer. The office was sleek and modern, a far cry from the modest home I had built with my own two hands. I felt out of place, but I wasn't about to let my discomfort show. "Mrs. Anderson," the lawyer began, his voice steady but kind, "we'll start by reviewing your assets. You need to know what's at stake and how we can best protect your interests." As we went over the paperwork, I started to feel a shift inside me. For so long, I had allowed myself to be the caretaker, the one who gave and gave without thinking about what I needed in return. But now, as I sat there with the lawyer, I realized I wasn't just a caretaker anymore. I was someone who could take control of her own destiny. By the time I left the office, I felt lighter. Not because the work was done. Far from it. But because I had finally taken that first step toward reclaiming my life. I wasn't just Michael's mother or Lily's mother-in-law anymore. I was Margaret Anderson, and I would no longer let anyone take that away from me. The days that followed my decision to reclaim control were filled with a mixture of anticipation and quiet strength. As much as I had wanted to ignore the truth, to pretend everything would go back to normal, I couldn't deny that something within me had shifted. There was no going back now. No pretending anymore. The life I had once known, the one where I had put my family's needs before my own, was no longer my reality. And while that truth was still painful, I knew it was also the first step towards something greater. I had begun by focusing on the small victories. Securing my finances, taking charge of my own destiny, and most importantly, reclaiming my sense of self-worth. The days that followed my meeting with the lawyer had been quiet, yet purposeful. I spent my mornings in reflection, my afternoons planning the next steps, and my evenings in solitude, where I could hear my thoughts clearly. One afternoon, while going over some paperwork, I received a call from the bank. My heart sank a little. I wasn't sure what to expect. Had they found something I had missed? Was something wrong? "Mrs. Anderson, this is Greg from your bank. I wanted to update you on the review we did of your accounts." I braced myself, but when he continued, the words that followed took me by surprise. "We've reviewed your assets and everything looks in order. In fact, your investments are quite solid. It seems like you've made some good decisions over the years. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I had always been cautious with money, but the fear of losing control had clouded my judgment in recent years. Now, I realized how much I had left to protect and build upon. I wasn't just a victim of circumstance. I was someone with agency, someone who had the power to determine what happened next. After the call, I sat in the quiet of my home for a while, letting the gravity of it all sink in. I had built something here. Not just material wealth, but a life that could stand on its own, regardless of the people who had tried to take advantage of me. I wasn't just Margaret Anderson anymore. I was a woman who had fought for herself, and I was stronger for it. But even as I moved forward, there was always the nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I hadn't yet confronted the heart of the issue: Michael and Lily. Despite the steps I had taken to protect myself, despite the peace I was slowly finding, I knew that I had to face them head-on. There would be no resolution without it. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table, hands shaking as I stared at the phone in front of me. I had avoided calling them for so long, but it was time. I couldn't continue letting the distance grow, the hurt fester, without confronting it directly. I took a deep breath and dialed Michael's number. "Mom." His voice was hesitant, but there was something more in it this time. A quiet recognition of the tension that had been hanging between us for so long. "I think it's time we talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I can't keep pretending like nothing happened. I need you to understand what I've been through." The silence on the other end of the line was palpable, but when Michael spoke again, his tone was different. Less defensive. More open. "I know, Mom," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I realize now I didn't see how much I hurt you. I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had waited for this moment, but hearing it from him felt almost unreal. The bitterness I had carried for so long began to lift, but only a little. The wounds were still fresh, and I needed time to heal. "I appreciate the apology, Michael," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But this isn't just about words. I need actions. I need to see that you respect me, that you understand the damage that's been done." He didn't reply immediately, but when he did, I could hear the sincerity in his voice. "I understand. I want to make things right, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes." The conversation didn't end with any grand resolution, but something had shifted. I wasn't sure if it would be enough, but it was a start. And that was more than I had expected. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a while. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to rebuild, not just my relationship with Michael but with myself. I had taken back the control I had lost, and I wasn't going to let go of it again. The following days were quiet, and I spent them in reflection. I worked through the practical matters, making sure my future was secure, but I also allowed myself time to heal. I met with Doris a few times, and we took long walks, talking about everything and nothing. The weight that had once crushed me felt lighter now. Not gone, but lighter. It wasn't going to be easy. Trust had to be rebuilt, and the process would take time. But for the first time in years, I felt at peace with the decisions I had made. I had taken control of my life. And nothing, not Michael, not anyone, could take that from me again. The days that followed were filled with small, deliberate steps toward healing. I wasn't in a rush anymore. I didn't need everything fixed right away. For the first time in a long time, I understood the value of patience, both with others and with myself. Michael continued to reach out, slowly, cautiously, but I didn't feel the need to jump at every message or phone call. Instead, I let the silence do the work. I wasn't going to beg for his love, for his recognition. I had already proven that I was worthy of both. Now, it was his turn to show that he valued me in ways that went beyond just words. One afternoon, while sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through old family photographs, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. These photographs, moments frozen in time, were still a part of my story, but they no longer defined me. The laughter and smiles captured in those frames didn't have to hold all the power over me. I had the ability to shape the future now, to write the next chapter of my life. I decided to make some changes, not just in how I interacted with my family, but in how I saw myself. It wasn't just about financial security or protecting my assets. It was about personal fulfillment. There were things I had put off, passions I had neglected, and dreams I had set aside in the name of being a good mother, a good grandmother, and a good wife. But now, I was going to explore those dreams, even if only for me. The first step was something small but significant. I signed up for a painting class. I had always loved art, but somewhere along the way, I had abandoned it. The thought of picking up a brush again made me nervous, but I also felt excitement stir inside me. This was mine. A piece of my soul, reclaimed. That evening, when Michael called again, I answered. He wasn't asking for forgiveness this time. He wasn't pleading for me to come back into the fold as he had before. This time, he spoke to me as an equal, acknowledging that the trust between us had been broken, but hoping, just hoping, that one day we could rebuild it. I know it's going to take time, Michael said, his voice softer, more sincere. But I want to be here for you, Mom. In a real way. I understand now that I haven't been. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry for that. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words settle in my heart. He wasn't offering grand gestures or empty promises. He was simply acknowledging the pain and asking for the chance to prove that he could do better. And in that moment, I knew I had to allow myself the space to let him try. I'm not asking you to fix everything overnight, I replied, my voice calm. But I do need to see that you can be the person I thought you were. And that you can respect the person I've become. There was a pause on the other end of the line before he finally responded. I understand, Mom. I'll do better. I promise. It wasn't a perfect resolution. We weren't magically healed, and there would still be obstacles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I felt like I had taken the first real step toward rebuilding. Not just my relationship with Michael, but with myself. As the weeks went by, I continued to explore new interests, invest in my personal growth, and prioritize my own happiness. I started to travel, something I had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. Whether it was a weekend trip to the mountains or a visit to a nearby museum, I embraced the freedom I had longed for. And through it all, I began to realize something truly remarkable. I had built something far more valuable than I had ever imagined. Not just the house, the bank accounts, or the assets, but a life that was truly mine. I had found the courage to reclaim my voice, to demand respect, and to rediscover the woman I had been before I became a mother, a wife, a grandmother. I wasn't just Margaret Anderson anymore. I was a woman who had lived through it all. The highs, the lows, the heartache, and the joy. And now I was writing the next chapter of my life, one where I was in control, one where I wasn't defined by the roles I had played, but by the strength I had found within myself. And no matter what happened with Michael or anyone else, I knew one thing for sure. I had built an empire that no one could ever take away. As I continued to embrace my newfound freedom, something shifted within me that I hadn't expected, a sense of peace. There were days when the pain of the past still lingered, but those days grew fewer and fewer. The more I focused on my own growth, the more I realized that I had become the person I needed all along. I had come to terms with the fact that the relationships I had once treasured, the ones I had thought would last forever, had changed. Some of them, like the one with Michael, would take time to heal. But others, well, those were simply meant to fade away. I was no longer clinging to what no longer served me. One Sunday afternoon, Doris and I sat together in my garden, sipping iced tea and watching the sun begin to set. The roses I had planted years ago were in full bloom, their soft petals a reminder of the care I had given to every corner of my life, even if it had gone unnoticed at times. You look different, Margaret, Doris said, her eyes narrowing as she studied me with a smile. There's something about you. You've got that spark back. I smiled and took a sip of my tea. It wasn't just the physical changes, the new painting classes, the trips I had taken, the quiet nights spent with my thoughts. It was more than that. It was the way I felt about myself, the way I no longer sought validation from others. I had learned to trust my own worth, to lean into my own strength. I'm not who I was before, I said quietly. And I'm not who I was in the past few years either. I've become someone new, someone I'm proud of. Doris chuckled. Well, I think it's about time, don't you? We both laughed then, the sound carrying through the air like music. I hadn't realized how much laughter I had missed, how long it had been since I allowed myself the freedom to feel joy, just for the sake of joy. The phone call from Michael came a few days later. I didn't know what to expect anymore, but his voice was different this time. It was softer, more thoughtful. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm here. For real. I don't want to lose you." There was a sincerity in his voice that I hadn't heard before. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy road to rebuild trust, but I also knew that this wasn't the same Michael who had pushed me away months ago. "I'm glad to hear that, Michael," I replied, my voice steady but calm. "But it's not just about what you say, it's about what you show. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll see where it goes." "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove it." The conversation ended there, and although it wasn't a grand reconciliation, it was a step forward. It was a step I hadn't been sure I would ever take, but there I was, opening myself up to the possibility of something better. I began to spend more time with the grandkids too, in ways that felt different. We would spend afternoons in the park, reading stories, and laughing together. And while the shadows of the past still lingered in some ways, I started to see that the future didn't have to be tainted by what had happened before. I could still build something new with them, something based on respect and love, not obligation. A few months later, I decided to do something I had been putting off for far too long. It was time to make the house my own again. The house that had been filled with so many memories, both good and bad, needed to reflect who I was now. I hired someone to repaint the rooms, changing the dull walls to warm, welcoming colors. I rearranged the furniture, bringing in pieces that spoke to me rather than to the version of me who had been living in the past. The house was no longer just a place of shelter, it was my sanctuary, a reflection of my journey, of my transformation. One evening, as I stood in the living room, looking out at the sunset through my newly painted windows, I realized something. I had built something more than just a home. I had built a life. It was mine. I had rebuilt it with my own hands, my own heart, and my own strength. And no one, could take that away from me. As I stood in the living room, taking in the changes I had made, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The house, my home, no longer felt like a place filled with empty echoes of what used to be. It was a sanctuary now, a place where I could be myself without fear of judgment or resentment. Every brushstroke on the wall, every piece of furniture I rearranged, felt like a step forward, a small but significant victory. I had spent so many years trying to make everything perfect for everyone else, to mold my life around the needs and desires of others. But now this house, these walls were mine. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was mine to shape, to enjoy, and to grow into. The peace I had been searching for was slowly taking root inside me. It wasn't a sudden thing. It didn't arrive in a burst of emotion or a dramatic moment. It crept in quietly, like the dawn, slowly brightening the corners of my heart. There were still moments when I missed the way things used to be, when I felt the sting of betrayal, but those moments were fewer and further apart. They no longer defined me. I had learned something valuable during this time. That healing isn't linear. It doesn't come all at once, and it doesn't happen according to a set timeline. But every step I took toward reclaiming my life, no matter how small, had brought me closer to the woman I had always been, the woman I had lost along the way. I spent the next few months focusing on myself in ways I never had before. I joined a community book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started gardening more, planting flowers that brought color to my backyard. I even signed up for a cooking class, a small act of self-love that felt empowering. These were things I had set aside for years, pushed to the back burner in favor of caring for others. But now they were my priority. And then, one evening, I received a message from Michael. It was simple, just a text that said, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I want to spend more time with you. When you're ready, I'd like to take you to dinner." I hadn't expected this. Not like this. He wasn't just apologizing anymore. He was trying. And for the first time in a long time I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, this could be the start of something new. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision in my chest. Was I ready to let him back in? Was I ready to open myself to the possibility of rebuilding what had been broken? I sat there for a moment, considering. It was tempting to hold on to the hurt, to keep my walls up. It would be easier to keep him at arm's length, to protect myself from any more pain. But I realized that if I wanted to truly heal, I had to allow for the possibility of change. Not just for him, but for me. I typed back a simple message. Dinner sounds good. Let's make it happen. As the days passed and our dinner plans took shape, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. I wasn't sure what would come of this conversation, or whether things would ever be the same. But I had learned something important, that I was strong enough to face whatever came, and I had the power to walk away if it no longer served me. When the evening of our dinner arrived, I felt a nervous excitement that I hadn't felt in years. I carefully chose my outfit, something simple but elegant, a reflection of the woman I had become. As I stood in front of the mirror, I saw someone new staring back at me. I saw someone who had fought for herself, someone who had finally learned that her worth didn't come from the approval of others, but from within. At the restaurant, Michael was waiting for me. He looked different too. There was an honesty in his eyes that hadn't been there before. As we sat down, the awkwardness lingered for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by a genuine conversation. We talked about the past, about the hurt, about the things we had both been too afraid to address. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. "I've missed you, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "And I'm sorry for everything. I didn't understand what I had until it was almost too late." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "And I'm sorry too. I should have spoken up sooner. But I wasn't strong enough. Now I am." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was progress. It was the start of something new, built on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to move forward. The following months were a mixture of small victories and setbacks. Michael and I began to rebuild our relationship, one step at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was giving up part of myself in the process. I was learning how to love with boundaries, how to forgive without forgetting, and how to demand the respect I deserved. And as for me, I continued to live my life fully. I traveled, I explored new hobbies, I made new friends. I was living for myself in ways I had never done before. I wasn't defined by my family's expectations, or by the roles I had played for so long. I was Margaret Anderson. Whole, strong and free. I had built an empire. Not one of wealth or property, but of strength, resilience, and self-respect. And no one could ever take that from me again. As the months went by, I began to realize something important. I wasn't just rebuilding my relationship with Michael. I was rebuilding my life. Each day, I was taking back a piece of myself that I had lost in the chaos of family dynamics, of self-sacrifice, and of trying to meet others' expectations. The more I focused on my own growth, the clearer it became that I had been living in the shadow of my past for far too long. The healing process wasn't linear, and it wasn't always easy. Some days were better than others. There were nights when I would lie awake, my mind racing through memories of the hurt I had endured. But the difference now was that I didn't let those moments define me. I had learned to sit with the discomfort, to acknowledge it, but not let it control me. I was no longer a prisoner of the past. I was free, free to move forward, free to create the future I deserved. And as I watched Michael truly try to make amends, I realized something else. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past, it was about letting go of its hold over me. It was about freeing myself from the pain so that I could fully step into the future, without carrying the weight of resentment on my shoulders. One evening, Michael invited me to his house for dinner. He had been trying hard, and I could see the effort he was making. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready to step back into the life I had once known, but I decided to go. I wanted to show him that I was willing to give us a chance, that I was open to seeing what the future could hold. When I arrived, the warmth of their home greeted me. The smell of a homemade meal filled the air, and for a brief moment, I could almost pretend that everything was as it had been. But I didn't need to pretend anymore. I knew who I was now, and I knew that I wasn't there to pick up the pieces for anyone else. I was there because I wanted to be. I had my own space, my own voice, and I was learning how to speak up for myself. As we sat down to eat, the conversation was light at first. But eventually, the topic turned to the past. Michael apologized again, this time with more depth, more understanding of the pain he had caused. And I listened. I listened without feeling the need to rush to forgive or to justify his actions. I simply listened, as an equal, not as someone who needed to prove her worth. I never understood, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I was selfish, and I took you for granted. I know you didn't understand, I replied, my voice steady. But I've learned that it's okay for me to say how I feel. It's okay for me to be hurt. And it's okay for me to move forward, no matter what. There was a quiet moment between us, and for the first time, it felt like we were both speaking from a place of truth. There were no more walls, no more defenses. Just two people who had lived through pain, and who were trying to make something better out of the mess that had been created. After dinner, we sat outside on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a peaceful evening, the kind of evening I had always longed for, a quiet moment of connection, of healing. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. As the seasons changed, so did I. I became more comfortable in my own skin. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices anymore, and I didn't need anyone to tell me who I should be. I had learned to trust myself, to respect myself, and to let go of the things that had held me back. I was no longer defined by my family's expectations or by the roles I had played for so many years. I was Margaret Anderson, a woman who had lived through the pain, who had endured, and who had come out stronger on the other side. One day, as I was sitting by the window, watching the rain fall outside, I realized just how much I had grown. I had built an empire, not of wealth or material things, but of strength, self-respect, and independence. I had built a life that was mine, truly mine, and no one could ever take that from me again. Michael still reached out from time to time, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, it was real. We had both learned the value of boundaries, of communication, and of taking responsibility for our actions. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, but there was also love, and that was enough. As for me, I continued to live fully. I traveled, I explored, I learned, and most importantly, I loved myself. I was no longer a caretaker, a martyr, or a passive participant in my own life. I was the author of my own story, and I was writing it with bold, unapologetic strokes. I had done it. I had built an empire. Not one made of money or things, but one built on resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that I was worth fighting for. And nothing, no one, could ever take that from me again.